When an A24 trailer drops, the reaction is noticeably different than it is for most studio releases. People don't just react to the plot, the cast, or the premise. The conversation starts earlier than that, at the logo. It's an A24 movie. It's become a statement of expectation, almost a shorthand for quality, ambition, or at the very least, intention. That kind of brand recognition doesn't come from saturation or marketing muscle. It comes from repetition, consistency, and a long-term relationship with the audience. Trust in entertainment is fragile. Audiences are constantly asked to invest time, money, and attention, often with diminishing returns. Over the last decade, major studios have leaned heavily into scale, intellectual property, and risk management, while audiences have quietly adjusted their expectations downward. Against that backdrop, A24 has built a reputation that feels almost old-fashioned, a studio that seems to care whether a movie actually means something. That trust isn't about snobbery or exclusivity, it's about predictability of effort. Viewers don't believe every A24 film will be great, but they do believe it will be trying. And in an era where so much content feels engineered, optimized, and flattened, that effort stands out. And that's why we're going to talk about it. Why do moviegoers trust A24 more than other studios? Well, first off, A24 behaves like a curator, not a content factory. Major studios operate under an entirely different set of incentives than A24. They aren't just making movies, they're maintaining ecosystems. Each release is expected to serve multiple masters at once. Shareholders, global markets, streaming platforms, merchandise pipelines, and long-term brand strategies. That reality shapes the films themselves. Scripts are often developed to be adaptable rather than specific, recognizable rather than risky, familiar rather than challenging. Over time, audiences learn to recognize that pattern. They sense when a movie exists because it fills a release slot, rather than because someone believed in it. Even when those films are technically polished, they often feel hollow, like products designed to perform rather than stories designed to resonate. A24 approaches filmmaking from the opposite direction. It behaves less like a factory and more like a gallery. Films are selected, not generated. That distinction matters deeply to viewers, even if they can't articulate it in industry terms. A24 releases feel like choices, not obligations. Someone saw value in this story, this voice, this tone, and decided it deserved to exist. That curatorial identity builds trust, slowly but powerfully. Audiences come to believe that an A24 film was backed because it had something to say, not because it checked enough boxes. Even when a movie doesn't land for them personally, it still feels like a sincere attempt rather than a cynical calculation. And sincerity, especially in the corporate entertainment landscape, goes a long way. Secondly, the A24 logo has become a promise. This won't be all generic. Most studio logos signal ownership. A24's logo signals intent. When it appears at the beginning of a film, it carries an unspoken promise that what follows will not feel interchangeable with 10 other releases from the same year. That promise is subtle, but it's incredibly powerful in an era where audiences increasingly feel that they've already seen the movie before it even starts. Generic filmmaking doesn't just bore people, it actively erodes trust. When viewers feel like a studio is recycling structures, tones, and visual language, they disengage emotionally. They stop expecting surprise, discovery, or risk. They watch on autopilot. A24 has built its reputation on resisting that flattening. Its films tend to be specific in tone, deliberate in pacing, and confident in identity. They don't apologize for being strange, slow, uncomfortable, or emotionally raw. That confidence signals belief, not just in the film, but in the audience's ability to engage with it. Over time, the A24 logo has become a shorthand for that belief. It doesn't promise comfort or consensus. It promises distinctiveness, and distinctiveness is what modern audiences crave when they feel drowned in sameness. A24 trains audiences through consistency, even across genres. One of the most impressive things about A24's brand is that it maintains coherence without repetition. The studio spawns genres that on paper should dilute its identity. Horror films sit alongside intimate dramas, surreal comedies, and award-season prestige projects. Yet audiences still recognize an A24 film almost instinctively. That's because the consistency isn't aesthetic or thematic, it's philosophical. A24 films tend to trust silence, ambiguity, and mood. They prioritize atmosphere over exposition and character over plot. They allow scenes to breathe and ideas to linger. This approach trains audiences over time. Viewers learn how to watch these movies. They know not to expect everything to be spelled out or neatly resolved. That training builds a shared language between studio and audience, which deepens trust. The films don't need to explain themselves because the relationship already exists. By contrast, major studios often chase consistency through formulas. Familiar structures and tones may reduce risk in the short term, but they also condition audiences to disengage. When viewers can predict every beat, they stop investing emotionally. A24's consistency keeps audiences alert rather than complacent, and that alertness fosters long-term loyalty. A24's marketing feels like it respects the audience. That's why they trust A21 more than other studios. Marketing is where many studios quietly undermine their own credibility. Trailers that misrepresent tone, campaigns that oversell spectacle, and hype that promises more than the film can deliver all teach audiences to approach releases with skepticism. Viewers learn to protect themselves from disappointment. A24's marketing philosophy feels fundamentally different. Instead of explaining everything or shouting about scale, its campaigns often focus on mood, imagery, and intrigue. Trailers are suggestive rather than exhaustive. Posters are striking rather than cluttered. Social media campaigns feel culturally fluent rather than corporate. This approach communicates respect. It implies that the film doesn't need to be sold through manipulation. The audience is trusted to recognize whether something speaks to them. That restraint builds goodwill, especially among viewers who are tired of being marketed to like consumers instead of participants. Over time, this honesty becomes part of the brand. Audiences come to believe that what A24 shows them is what they'll get. That alignment between marketing and experience is rare, and it plays a significant role in why viewers trust the studio more than its larger counterparts. Another reason moviegoers trust A21 more than other studios, A24, build a fandom, not just a customer base. There is fundamental difference between people who buy tickets and people who feel emotionally invested in a brand. A24 has cultivated the latter. Its audience doesn't just watch the films, they discuss them, debate them, recommend them, and incorporate them into their cultural identity. This fandom isn't built on nostalgia or franchise loyalty. It's built on taste. Viewers bond over shared sensibilities rather than shared universes. That creates a more personal connection, one rooted in values rather than obligation. When a studio becomes part of someone's identity, trust deepens. Fans are more forgiving of missteps because they see the bigger picture. They don't expect perfection, they expect integrity. A24 has earned that expectation by consistently positioning itself as a studio that values voice and originality over mass appeal. And then they bet on filmmakers, and audiences can feel that. One of the most common perceptions surrounding A24 is that it allows directors to actually direct. Whether entirely true or not, that perception matters. Audiences believe these films reflect a singular vision rather than a committee compromise. Major studios often talk about supporting creators, but the realities of massive budgets and global markets limit how far that support can go. Risk becomes something to manage rather than explore. Creative decisions are filtered through layers of caution. A24 operates in a space where risk is survivable. Budgets are smaller, expectations are different, creative freedom feels more tangible. That freedom shows up on screen. Viewers sense when a filmmaker's voice has survived the process, and they respond to that authenticity. Even when an A24 film doesn't fully work, audiences rarely feel betrayed. They recognize the attempt. That recognition reinforces trust in the studio backing the work. Their wins are allowed, and their misses are acceptable. Trust doesn't require a perfect track record. It requires a believable one. A24's major successes have been culturally visible, critically celebrated, and emotionally resonant. Those wins reinforce the idea that the studio knows how to identify meaningful work. Just as important, A24's failures don't feel like cash grabs. When a film misses, audiences tend to frame it as a personal mismatch rather than a breach of trust. That framing is crucial. It allows the brand to absorb disappointment without collapsing credibility. This tolerance exists because A24 never promised universal appeal. The studio positioned itself as a place for exploration, not guarantees. That honesty gives audiences room to disagree without disengaging. And then A24 feels human in a corporate industry. Perception shapes trust as much as reality. A24 still feels approachable, culturally literate, and slightly scrappy, even as it continues to grow. It doesn't project the image of a faceless institution. It feels like a label run by people who genuinely like movies. In an era where audiences are increasingly skeptical of large corporations, that perceived humanity matters. People are more willing to forgive missteps from entities they believe are acting in good faith. Major studios often feel distant and transactional. A24 feels conversational. That emotional proximity builds trust in a way that scale never can. Major studios accidentally trained audiences to distrust them. A24's rise happened alongside growing audience fatigue with major studio practices. Endless reboots, sequels, shared universes, and nostalgia-driven projects have conditioned viewers to expect diminishing creative returns. Yeah, we're looking at you, Marvel. When studios appear more invested in protecting brands and telling stories, audiences respond with skepticism. Originality starts to feel like a liability rather than an asset. Over time, trust erodes. A24 benefits from existing as a counterpoint to that approach. By consistently associating itself with originality and risk, it absorbs the goodwill lost elsewhere. Audiences don't just trust A24, they distrust what it represents the alternative to. The real reason? A24 offers identity in an era of choice overload. Modern audiences are overwhelmed. Streaming libraries are endless. Attention is fragmented, and cultural signals are noisy. In that chaos, people crave filters, shortcuts that help them decide what's worth their time. A24 functions as one of those filters. The logo itself becomes a recommendation. It signals intent, intention, distinctiveness, and cultural relevance. That signaling power is the foundation of trust. A24 doesn't promise comfort or certainty. It promises effort and identity. In an era defined by content overload, that clarity is invaluable. A24 understands that trust is emotional, not transactional. One of the most overlooked reasons audiences trust A24 more than major studios is that A24 treats trust as an emotional relationship rather than a transactional one. Major studios tend to think in terms of conversion, clicks, opening weekends, box office legs, streaming minutes. Trust in that worldview is a metric to be optimized. If the numbers look good, the assumption is that the audience is happy. But audiences don't experience movies as data points. They experience them emotionally. They remember how a film made them feel walking out of the theater. What lingered days later, what conversations it sparked, what images stayed lodged in their head. A24 films, even when divisive, tend to leave residue. They don't evaporate the moment the credits roll. That emotional residue matters. It builds memory, and memory builds loyalty. When people trust A24, they're trusting that the studio values that emotional afterlife. They believe the movie isn't designed to be consumed and forgotten, but to sit with them, challenge them, or haunt them a little. Major studios, by contrast, increasingly treat films as content events. The emphasis is on the release moment, the opening weekend, the first wave of discourse. Once that window closes, attention shifts to the next product. Audiences feel that churn, and it subtly erodes trust. A24's slower, more deliberate relationship with its films tells viewers that the studio expects and respects their emotional investment. A24 allows movies to be uncomfortable without apologizing for it. Another major trust signal is A24's comfort with discomfort. Many of its films sit in emotional and thematic spaces that mainstream studios often avoid or soften. These movies may explore grief without catharsis, horror without relief, or ambiguity without resolution. Crucially, A24 doesn't frame that discomfort as a problem that needs to be explained away. Mainstream studio films often hedge their bets. If something gets too dark, a joke is inserted. If a theme becomes more challenging, the script reassures the audience that everything will be okay. If ambiguity creeps in, it's usually resolved by the final act. This approach isn't inherently wrong, but it sends a message. The studio doesn't fully trust the audience to sit with unease. A24 does the opposite. It allows films to end unresolved, characters to remain flawed, and emotions to stay raw. That choice tells audiences they're capable of handling complexity. Over time, viewers internalize that respect. They might not always enjoy the experience, but they appreciate being treated like adults rather than customers who need constant reassurance. That respect builds trust because it removes a sense of manipulation. The film isn't guiding the audience towards a predetermined emotional outcome. It's presenting an experience and letting viewers respond on their own terms. A24 films invite interpretation instead of enforcing meaning. Another way A24 differentiates itself from major studios is through its relationship with meaning. Many studio films are designed to be easily decoded. Themes are underlined, motivations are spelled out, and messages are delivered clearly enough to survive international markets and broad demographics. A24 films often resist that clarity. They invite interpretation rather than enforce it. Viewers are encouraged to think, argue, rewatch, and debate. The film doesn't always tell you what to feel or what to conclude. It leaves space. That space is essential to trust. When a movie allows multiple readings, it signals confidence. It suggests that filmmakers aren't afraid of disagreement or confusion. They're willing to let the audience participate in the meaning marketing process. Major studios tend to avoid that risk because ambiguity doesn't test well. But by prioritizing consensus over conversation, they lose something vital. A24's willingness to let films be discussed rather than settled turns each release into a shared cultural puzzle. Audience trust that they're being invited into a dialogue, not lectured or herded towards a takeaway. A24 doesn't chase trends. It lets trends chase it. One of the fastest ways to lose audience trust is trend chasing. When studios chase whatever is currently popular, whether it's multiverses, legacy sequels, or viral-friendly concepts, it signals insecurity. Audiences can sense when a film exists because the market demanded it, rather than because a creative impulse drove it. A24 has largely avoided that trap. Its films often feel slightly out of step with dominant trends, and that's intentional. The studio doesn't rush to replicate its own success or mimic what's currently profitable elsewhere. Instead, it allows its identity to evolve organically. Ironically, that restraint often positions A24 as trend-setting rather than trend-following. Visual styles, narrative approaches, and tonal risks introduced in A24 films frequently ripple outward into the broader industry. When audiences notice that influence, it reinforces the perception that A24 operates from conviction rather than fear. Trust grows when viewers believe a studio knows who it is. A24's refusal to constantly reinvent itself to chase relevance makes it feel grounded. The studio doesn't panic when the market shifts. It waits, listens, and continues doing what it does. A24's scale works in its favor, not against it. Scale is a double-edged sword in Hollywood. Massive budgets allow for spectacle and reach, but they also demand safety. When hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line, creative decisions become conservative by necessity. Every risk multiplies the potential for loss. A24's smaller scale frees it from that pressure, because its films don't need to perform at blockbuster levels to be considered successful. They can afford to be niche, personal, or strange. That freedom is visible on screen, and audiences respond to it. Importantly, viewers don't mistake smaller scale for lower ambition. A24 films often feel more ambitious emotionally and thematically than much larger productions. That inversion surprises audiences and strengthens trust. The studio proves again and again that ambition isn't measured in budget size. A24 understands modern audience literacy. Today's audiences are media literate in a way previous generations weren't. Viewers understand studio politics, franchise economics, and marketing manipulation. They know when nostalgia is being weaponized. They recognize when a movie exists primarily to maintain IP value. A24 seems to understand that literacy and adapt accordingly. It doesn't pretend audiences are unaware of the business side of filmmaking. Instead, it minimizes the sense of calculation. Its films don't feel like they're trying to hide their intentions behind spectacle. That transparency builds trust. Viewers feel like the studio is being honest about what it's offering. The relationship feels mutual rather than exploitive. And finally, moviegoers trust A21 more than other studios because A24's cultural alignment feels organic, not engineered. Cultural relevance is another area where major studios often struggle. Efforts to appear progressive, edgy, or socially aware can feel forced when they're filtered through corporate approval chains. Audiences are quick to detect when a film is gesturing towards relevance rather than engaging with it. A24's cultural alignment tends to feel more organic. Its films often emerge from genuine creative perspectives rather than top-down mandates. Social themes aren't bolted on, they're embedded. That authenticity resonates with viewers who are tired of surface-level engagement. Trust goes when audiences believe a studio is responding to cultural rather than exploiting it. A24's work often feels like it's part of the conversation, not trying to control it. In a media landscape defined by overload, repetition, and risk aversion, that trust is rare. Because it's rare, it's powerful. When people say they trust A24, they aren't saying the studio is flawless. They're saying it feels honest. They're saying it feels like someone is still making decisions based on belief rather than fear. In modern entertainment, where so much content feels designed to minimize loss instead of maximize meaning, that belief is everything. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And let me know what's your favorite A24 movie. And with that, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.